Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Northern Ontario, where the family who died in a house fire on Pikangikum First Nation have been identified. A house fire on Pikangikum First Nation claimed the lives of 3 people on February 22nd. Over the weekend, leaders in the Ontario Police confirmed 3 bodies were recovered, and they're the cause of the fire. MLA Sol Mamakwa read out the MPP Sol Mamakwa read out the victims' names in the Ontario Legislature today.
Vernie Turtle, 44, Kristen Moose, 38, and Kendriana Turtle, 8. On Wednesday, February 22nd, a deadly house fire took the lives of this family in Pikangikum First Nation. What is this government doing to help Pikangikum?
Minister of Indigenous Affairs Greg Rickford said the government is speaking with community leaders and making sure they have what they need. The Grand Chief of the political organization that represents 51 First Nations in Northern Ontario has been suspended. Anishinaabe Nation Grand Chief Derek Fox has been suspended with pay for allegedly violating NAN's Executive Council Code of Conduct. In a statement, NAN's Executive Council said an internal investigation is underway and Fox is suspended pending the outcome. The Executive Council, made up of Deputy Grand Chief Annabette Achny-Penescum and Deputy Grand Chief Victor Linklater, says steps have been taken to ensure an orderly transition of all matters currently handled by the Grand Chief. No timeline has been given for how long the investigation may take, and NAN is not commenting any further. Fox has been serving as Grand Chief since 2021. 2 Indigenous women have filed a class action lawsuit against the British Columbia government over the issue of forced sterilizations and abortions. Provincial hospitals across Western Canada have long been accused of forcing Indigenous women to be sterilized or have abortions without their free and informed consent. Alberta-based Cooper Regal is one of the law firms representing the 2 women, Lorraine Davis and Stephanie Roy. Anita Campbell of Cooper Regal says the practices are state forms of colonial violence.
These were policies of the federal government and provincial governments to assimilate and dominate, a group of people through eugenics. It's a racist and discriminatory attitudes that made way to make it legal for these violent acts to be committed by medical professionals. And really, no one has been held accountable.
Métis Nation of Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta have signed agreements that give those political organizations recognition by the Crown as Métis governments. APTN's Chris Stewart in Edmonton has more.
The Métis Nation of Alberta signed an agreement with Federal Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Mark Miller that was decades in the making. Since the 1960s, the MNA has fought to have its voice recognized federally and provincially as a Métis government. And the signing today makes it official, and they are not alone. The Métis Nation of Saskatchewan and the Métis Nation of Ontario also signed agreements today acknowledging them as a Métis government as well. MNA President Audrey Portra told APTN that the signing has been long overdue.
And I remember, as a much younger person, people being very excited. This was going to change our world. This was finally going to get the recognition we deserved. And we all know it didn't happen. There was some little pieces that happened, but our people never gave up. They kept pushing forward because we believed in who we were as a nation of people. And so we've seen it from no recognition to this today actually being fully recognized as the government for the Métis people within Alberta.
Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller says today will be a day to be remembered.
This is a big day for them in many ways, and I think look forward to many more as we move on with some. And we can't hide the fact that there is unfinished business left, and we'll continue to be working with them. So this is an important day first and foremost for about 16,000 Métis citizens in Alberta.
The Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta Métis Nations gives them jurisdiction on memberships, elections, administration, housing, child welfare, and governance on a nation-to-nation, government-to-government basis. Minister Miller says the legislation will soon be coming to implement the agreement.
We have to keep our eye on the ball on this one. There is still a process where we have to introduce some legislation. We're hoping to get that done in the spring session of Parliament and hopefully passed. We don't, in a minority government, predetermine that process. And then some really important issues in and around land claims policies, making sure that we're moving towards a core governance treaty that will continue to really build on this relationship.
The agreement says that negotiations will continue to implement a core self-government treaty in the next 2 years.
We've come a long way, and today is a great day to sign our self-government agreement. It is amazing, and it's all happened in the last while. You know, for many years we took a few steps forward and a few steps back, and over the last 5 to 6 years we have made amazing steps forward.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
A female Indigenous politician in the British Columbia legislature gave a damning resignation speech last week. Melanie Mark described her experience in the legislature as a torture chamber. And as Annette Francis tells us, Mark's experience is common for Indigenous women across Canada.
7 years ago, Melanie Mark was celebrated as the first First Nations woman to be sworn into British Columbia's legislature.
So that was a very proud day for me. And the 7 years that I served as the member for Vancouver Mount Pleasant has been the real honor of my life, to be an advocate for the people that I care about, a community that I grew up in.
But as a politician, Mark had to put up with what she describes as character assassination.
When I described it as a torture chamber, it's because of the things that I had to endure from the official opposition. And I've made it clear on the record that mostly white men have been particularly vile and rude. And quite honestly, I just never imagined that that's what it would be like for an elected official.
That's something Jessica McCallum Miller knows all too well. In 2018, she was the first Indigenous woman and youngest to be elected to serve on Terrace, BC's council. She resigned in 2021.
In representing demographics that had never been represented prior in those levels of government, it's quite difficult, and you do experience the character assassination. You do experience a lot of the bullying that she talked about in her resignation speech. Yeah.
She says it was tough to hear about Mark's treatment.
I was extremely upset. I cried when I first heard. She's a great leader. She always has been and always will be, in my opinion. I think they were tears of frustration mainly.
Nahani Fontaine was elected as an MLA in the Manitoba legislature the same year as Mark. She was disappointed at her treatment, but not surprised.
Yet again, one of, Canadian legislatures or parliament have managed to be a place of such toxicity that it has pushed out yet another Indigenous women MLA, another Indigenous woman politician, when there are so few of us across the country.
Fontaine has had her own challenges. She says it's a tough, toxic work environment that is predominantly males, but she's come up with a strategy.
One of the coping skills that I use so that I am somewhat, not a part of what's going on is I will only focus on the Speaker of the House. And so my focus is solely on the Speaker so that I don't get drawn in, or that my spirit doesn't get kind of, drawn into that toxicity.
At 47 and retired, Mark says she feels at peace now.
I've received so much love from women and men and people across this province. I can't walk on the streets right now without being stopped or chased. I have people chasing me. Hey, Melanie, I want to say something to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mark says it's going to take everyone to make a change, and it can start by who is elected into those positions. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We'd like to hear your thoughts about the way Indigenous women are treated in politics. Here's how you can continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on our website. That's aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. Universities are rescinding honorary degrees received by Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond. Now there are calls for even more honors to be pulled back. Details coming up after the break. Welcome back. 3 universities have rescinded her honorary degrees. And now an Indigenous women's group is calling for Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond's Order of Canada to be revoked. The former judge's Indigenous ancestry has been in question since last autumn after a series of CBC articles challenged the Indigenous heritage of her late father. McGill, Carleton, and the University of Regina have rescinded the honorary degrees given to Turpel-Lafond. Tracy Robinson is with the Indigenous Women's Collective and says it's important institutions take Indigenous identity theft seriously.
It's an acknowledgement of the harm that Indigenous identity theft has for Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women. And we've stated from the outset that Indigenous identity theft is an act of colonial violence. So, and we believe that the University of Regina, Carleton, and McGill agree with us.
A sacred medicine mask and a turtle rattle have returned to their home in Haudenosaunee territory. They'd been on display in a museum in Geneva, Switzerland. Surprisingly, asking for the objects back and their return only took 7 months. Because as Amelia Fournier tells us, repatriations of cultural objects from overseas sometimes takes years.
The Museum of Ethnography in Geneva hosted a ceremony on February 7th to return a turtle rattle and medicine mask to the Haudenosaunee Nation.
I suppose we're not going to open the boxes.
Objects which members of the Tuscarora Nation saw when they visited the museum last July.
In the permanent exhibit, they saw a medicine mask and a turtle rattle. And right away, they came to me and they said, that shouldn't be there, So we had a good relationship with the museum already. So we talked to the director and we told her that the mask should be taken down. And she said, if it's offensive to you, we'll take it down.
Kenneth Deere of Ganawage said the Haudenosaunee went further and asked for their outright return and was surprised at how quickly the request happened. In her speech at the ceremony, Museum Director Karine Ayele-Durand said, quote, "These restitutions and these returns are not an end in and of themselves, but are a step in a long process that started 100 years ago and that will continue with regular exchanges and collaborations." 2 days later, the Haudenosaunee planted a tree of peace in Geneva to commemorate a relationship with the city that goes back decades. In 1923, Chief Desgahe of Six Nations went there to speak at the League of Nations, a forerunner to the United Nations, to denounce Canada's treatment of Indigenous people. But he was blocked from speaking by Canada and Great Britain. Deere says the city of Geneva allowed Desgahe to address its citizens publicly.
And he was well received by the people of Geneva. They supported him. He walked among them, and many dignitaries and the mayor of Geneva were helping him to his objectives with the league.
Most international repatriations of cultural objects require consent between national governments. But Geneva dealt with the Haudenosaunee on a nation-to-nation basis. That's not always the case. The Yaqui tribe in southern U.S. and Mexico, for example, just got a sacred deer's head back from a Swedish museum, but only after nearly 20 years of negotiating. And even then, they had to remind the government of Mexico to release the head to them.
Some colonizing entities, feel that they're superior to us, and they feel that they should have it, or they have a right to it, And we say, no, you don't. That's our stuff. We will decide who has a right to use these masks.
Deere says he hopes sacred objects will be returned faster in the future.
7 months is a model for other museums to follow. The museum directly returning the material to the Indigenous people concerned, not to another museum or not to another government, but to the Indigenous people.
The mask and rattle are in good hands, says Deere, and will be used for ceremony. Amelia Fournier, APTN National News, Ganawage Mohawk Territory.
Still to come, we'll take you to an event on the West Coast where a 30-foot totem pole was raised over the weekend. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. This one courtesy of Jan Dyke. Jan tells us that she works at kilometer 147, located north of South End, Saskatchewan. And the scenery, this is the scenery that she gets to see there all the time. Thanks for sending in a sample of what you get to enjoy each day, Jen. If you have a picture and would like to share it across the nation, send your photo to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, -5 for Halifax, 10 below with snow in St. John's. -17 in Kuujjuaq, Nain, and Cartwright. +1 with snow in Montreal, 3 below with snow in Val-d'Or. Flurries and +1 in Sault Ste. Marie, 0 in North Bay. 0 for Thunder Bay with snow, -6 and snow in Sioux Lookout. -14 with snow for God's Lake and Norway House. 7 below for Winnipeg and Brandon, -6 in Dauphin. -9 and a cloudy day for Regina, 12 below in Saskatoon. -13 in Meadow Lake, snow, and -15 for La Ronge. In northern Alberta, -12 in Fort McMurray, 18 below for Fort Chip. -11 with snow in Edmonton, 3 below, and snow in Lethbridge. +5 for Vancouver, 4 above in Victoria. -5 with snow in Prince George, 4 below with snow in Smithers. -27 in Old Crow, 16 below in Whitehorse. -19 in Yellowknife and Norman Wells, 15 below with snow in Wrigley. -26 for Sax Harbor, Paulatuck, and Colville Lake. 27 below in Chesterfield, 31 below in Whale Cove. -35 in Resolute, 38 below in Joe Haven. Nisga'a Village raised a 30-foot totem pole in northern BC this weekend. It's a replica of a pole that was taken in the early 1900s. The original stands in a University of British Columbia museum. A Nisga'a hereditary chief and carver shared the history of the pole. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
Nisga'a community members gathered in a carving shed to witness a massive totem pole being raised in the village of Lac-Alzap. The totem pole belongs to the House of La. It is a replica of a totem pole that once stood in the village of Ankida, but was taken from the community in the early 1900s. Samogit, or House Chief La, says he is thankful for the carvers in the community for joining to raise the pole.
We can't say enough how beautiful it felt. It was really something, to see it moved and to see it begin to come towards where it'll rest and where the people will see it and enjoy it.
So come forward! Dozens of community members carry the House of La's totem pole to be transported through the village. Nisga'a hereditary chiefs in their regalia walked with the pole. According to Samogit La, the original totem pole that is in the University of British Columbia Museum was carved by Nisga'a Samogit Oye, who was sought after by people around the Northwest for his work.
Greatest and probably the most well-known at the time. He apparently carved poles all over the Northwest here.
According to the University of British Columbia's Museum of Anthropology website, the original totem pole washed downriver in a severe flood in the 1900s, but was later purchased by anthropologist Marius Barbeau for the university in 1947. Last year, renowned Nisga'a carver Jowett, or Calvin McNeil, was commissioned to carve the replica pole. Jowett says people from all over the world came to watch his team work and learn about the pole and Nisga'a culture.
This whole year I've seen people from all over the world that came to witness the carving of such a beautiful pole and to understand a bit of our culture.
A young Nisga'a child inspected the pole to make sure it was ready to be raised. Jowett drew life into the totem pole, and hereditary chiefs blessed the totem pole with cedar as part of the ceremony.
Breathe the life into the pole. All that energy throughout that year went through me and into the pole. So it was quite a relief because a month leading up to this, it was pretty overwhelming. I was losing out on sleep, just nervous, excited, all the emotions that a carver should go through too.
The totem pole was raised outside of the Lac aux Apps Community Center. A large shaman, supernatural beaver, and eagle are some of the designs carved into the pole. Jowett stated, totem poles are not just art pieces, but tell their history and who they are as Niska.
The poles that you see, they look like a very fine artwork, but they're a lot more than that. They're our history. They're our identity.
This year, another totem pole is set to be repatriated from the National Museum of Scotland. According to Niska, over 100 totem poles from villages are living away from their lands. Samoget La would like to see all Niska poles that can be transported back to their territory to return home.
All things being equal, I would love to have them all back, but knowing that's not quite possible, we would like to get some of the ones that people will recognize that are still there, that are being able to be replicated or whatever we can do with them to bring them back.
The Niska community plans to eventually raise 2 more totem poles outside the community center. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Lac aux Apps.
Beautiful shots there. To the world of sports now, and it was a historic night for Métis Skip and her curling club out of Manitoba. Carrie Anderson's team has won a 4th straight Canadian Women's Curling Championship. Team Canada secured the title with a 10-4 win over Manitoba's Jennifer Jones. The last team to win a four-peat was Colleen Jones's foursome from 2001 to 2004. Anderson's team will now represent Canada in the Women's World Championship next month in Sweden. And congrats to Team Anderson, and best of luck next month in Sweden. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Monday. For much more, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you back here tomorrow.